Hello everyone, I'm going to go over 3 multiple choice questions about proteins. And I'm going to do things a little bit differently today. I'm going to go over an easy one, a more difficult one, and then a really hard one. So this is just to show you the different levels of questions that you might see on a test. With that being said, let's just jump right into it. Here's the easy question. Which of the following is the monomer of a protein? So before I even look at the answers, I'm thinking mono, single unit of a protein. The reason why this is an easy question is I like to call these regurgitation questions, where you should just be able to regurgitate the answer. You should be able to think monomer, protein, this one's going to be amino acid. This is something you should just have memorized and you should just have ready to go if somebody asks you. So this is why this question is a little bit easier of a question, is you don't have to do a lot of thought with this question. It's just rote memorization. Here's the medium question. Hydrogen bonds between atoms in the backbone of a polypeptide chain are most directly responsible for which level of protein structure? So this again is a little bit more of a difficult question. There are some larger words here in the question itself, and just the whole thought process behind this is a little bit more difficult than the first question. So before I even get into the answers, let's think about this and try to reason through this question. So we're looking at these hydrogen bonds. They're going to be between parts of the backbone of a polypeptide chain. They're going to be responsible for which level? Now, we have 4 different levels. We have our primary, secondary, tertiary, and quaternary. The primary is the first level. This is just the sequence of amino acids. Our secondary level is where they start to bond on each other and create these alpha helixes and beta pleated sheets. Now, in these different structures, there are those hydrogen bonds that the question's talking about. Tertiary is when these start bonding together and start forming a larger structure. And then quaternary is when there are several of these polypeptide chains and they're bonded together. So I am initially thinking that the second level here is what they're thinking about. And if I look at my answers, it is there, and it is B, and that is the correct answer. So again, it's a little bit more difficult of a question, but it's still pretty easy in the sense of I have to memorize a little bit of things. I have to apply that knowledge to this question, but it's a lot more difficult than the first level. Let's move on to the last level here. So here is the hard question. A scientist notices that an unknown amino acid is not soluble in water and clusters away from other polar molecules. Which property best describes this amino acid's R group? So there's a lot of information here in this question, a lot of difficult words. Let's try to break this down. All right, so we're talking about an unknown amino acid. It's not soluble in water. I'm going to circle not here because that's really important. That means it's non-polar. It clusters away from other polar molecules, again, reinforcing that idea that it's non-polar. Remember that amino acids have that central carbon, the carboxylic acid, a hydrogen group, an amino group, and then this R group can be a lot of different things. There's actually 20 different amino acids. It can be a host of different elements or atoms for those R groups. Whenever I go over this with my students, typically I tell them that polar amino acids look for oxygen. It's not a perfect rule, but I tell them look for oxygen. Non-polar, it's a little bit more difficult, but there's going to be a lot of carbon and hydrogen in non-polars. So knowing that, we're going to guess that the answer is going to have to do with it being non-polar, having a lot of carbon and hydrogen, but no oxygen. A, it contains a charged carboxyl group. Nope, we didn't talk about that. That doesn't make sense. B, it forms ionic bonds with R groups. Nope, that doesn't make sense. We didn't talk about that. C, it contains mostly carbon and hydrogen atoms. We did talk about that. I think that's the answer. Let's move on to D and E though. It acts as a strong base that accepts electrons in solution. Nope, we didn't talk about that. Doesn't make sense for this one. And E, it easily forms hydrogen bonds with other water molecules. Nope, that would actually mean that with polar, and it's the opposite. So C is the correct answer, and that is correct. So you can see the different levels here of the questions. We start out with an easy one that's just memorization. A little bit more difficult question, the medium one, had a little larger words, was a little bit more difficult to comprehend. And in this last question, there was a lot going on, a lot more processing of information, thinking about things, but you still had to have things memorized. So I'm going to start doing this more often, where I'm showing the 3 different levels of questions to show you what the difficulty of questions may look like for, let's say, an AP biology class or a college level class.